Krishna Krishna Hare Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Miranda Chakshurunmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradhayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tushe Namaha Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. First, I want to apologize. I had promised to send out the summary notes for chapter 4 as well as the questions last week. It turned out to be a lot more work than I anticipated. Just bear with me, it's a work in progress. But in the meantime, what I also want to do is summarize or go through briefly the content of the last 4 chapters. Because chapter 5, we will find, is really a summary and a slight addition to what we've already learned in the first 4 chapters. So if we look at chapter 1, how many divisions did we say chapter 1 had? Sorry, spring test. 2? Who said 2? 2, yes. So what were the rough sections? Not the verse numbers, but like the descriptions of the sections. So the first section where Arjuna was sorry, go on.
Observing the armies.
Observing the armies. So what was the connection of that section to Krishna? Because that section is called Sainya Darshana Yoga, or the yoga of observing armies on the battlefield. What did we say was the specific, or how does that section connect us to Krishna?
Like on Krishna's side, we see all austerities.
Auspiciousness, yes.
It's already been. We can see that the victory is on Arjuna's side because Krishna is there.
Right. So the very way of viewing the army, we see auspiciousness where Krishna is connected, and inauspiciousness, or rather defeat or moroseness when there's a lack of connection to Krishna. So that's the first section, observing the armies. And then the second section, what was the content of that section?
Arjuna Vishadi.
Yes. So in English, that is?
Lamentation.
Arjuna's lamentation. So why is that connected to Krishna? Why is that called yoga? Someone else?
Because he's connecting to the bodily platform.
But why is it called yoga? I connect to the bodily platform every day. But nobody studies that or gets inspiration from that. Because what is the result of Arjuna's lamentation?
Killing his own family son.
The result.
Usually bewilderment
And then?
and non-inaction.
But then what action does he take as a result of his confusion? He surrenders to Krishna. He surrenders to Krishna. So from that confusion, from Arjuna's lamentation, he actually manifests surrender. So therefore it is called yoga. That remorse, that lamentation, that confusion that results us in going closer to Krishna is actually beneficial. So chapter 1 sets the scene. It provides Arjuna's crossroad for why he's taking shelter of the Lord. So chapter 2, we were discussing 5 sections. The content of the first section is what? Particularly culminating in verse 2:7 was? Taking shelter of Krishna. So Arjuna takes shelter. And then starting from around 2:11 onwards through to 2:29, Krishna provides what instruction? Yes, he provides knowledge of body and soul. The purpose of this knowledge is what? It is self-knowledge by which Arjuna is enabled to transcend the material obstacle that he's faced with. Knowledge to transcend material lamentation. In the third section, from verse 30 onwards to roughly 38. So what was that section? Yes, you can say it was Karma Kand, but Krishna's motivation is that Krishna wants Arjuna to engage in materially motivated activity?
To counteract his lamentation.
Not exactly. Nishkam Karma Yoga comes here in the fourth section, and that's verse 38 or 39 onwards through to 53. Nishkama Karma Yoga. This is a sadhana that enables the practitioner to realize transcendental knowledge of oneself being the spirit soul. But what is the principal activity of Nishkama Karma Yoga? perform what? Prescribed duties without attachment for?
For Krishna prema.
No. For liberation or for purification of heart initially. So, because the sadhana, the activity itself is focused on prescribed duty, Krishna here provides a material motivation to fix Arjuna in prescribed duty. And then he's going to say, actually, what I want you to do is focus on your prescribed duty, not for material results, but rather for internal purification of heart. Then, I think starting from text 54 on to text 72, the last section of chapter 2, what is the focus? Sthita pragya. So what does that mean? What does the word pragya mean? Learned, realized. And sthita means? Fixed. So fixed realization of Atma. The qualities of one with fixed realization of Atma. So in some sense, chapter 2 was a summary of the entire process from beginning through to end. So therefore Srila Prabhupada calls it Contents of Gita Summarized. Chapter 3, we discussed 4 sections, some can say 5. So the first section we discussed was from verse 1 through to verse roughly 15. Or was it, I think it was 15. So what was the focus of that section? What was Arjuna's question? Because Krishna here had spoken both about Nishkama Karma Yoga, he had also spoken about the ability to stop work and transition beyond the need for work. So Arjuna's question was, if both are possible options, why don't I just stop work and focus on Atma? And Krishna's answer to that question said that both actually give you the same result at the end. But it's a question of one's personal qualification as to whether one should work or should not work. So the focus of this section then was Krishna describing the purity of prescribed duties. Because they are instructions from the Lord. Instructions from the Vedas, spoken by the Lord, and so therefore, Nitya Yagya Pratishtitam, the Lord is eternally present in prescribed duties. So there's nothing wrong with performing prescribed duties. Prescribed duties are pure when connected to Krishna and can actually purify the heart.
Just read that. That's very hard to read.
Lord is eternally in prescribed duty. Instructions from the purity of prescribed duties, because prescribed duties are instructed in the Vedas. The Vedas are spoken by the Lord, and therefore the Lord is eternally present in prescribed duties.
The prescribed duties have been doing action or having knowledge?
Prescribed duties are
different things. Like he was saying that you've got the Buddha yoga, the Jnana yoga, or the actual karma, which is just doing the prescribed duties for your action.
yes, in this.
Either way was that gets there, but as long as it's prescribed duties.
Yes. So as long as according to one's quality and nature, one is acting according to what the scriptures describe. As a married man, there are certain duties, and as a sannyasi, there are certain duties. If one is acting according to those prescribed duties, then one will find that one can find Krishna through those duties. They can purify the heart. So verse 16 through to, what verse number was it? 29, was it? Yes, 29. What did this section describe?
Even when the heart is always purified, what are the implications of performing duties?
Implications, or when the heart is purified, that means that one has transcended the need to work. So this is the Atma Ratir. So one who is fixated on the Atma. For him, what are his qualities and what is the prescribed course of activity for them also, or recommended activity. So qualities of and activities for. You can say those who have understood that they are a spirit soul. And what was the recommendation for them? Anybody? Was it to leave society?
Perform your prescribed duties.
As and for what motivation?
Example.
To set an example. To set an example for others. Perform prescribed duties. Then verse 30 through, I think, 37, was it? 36. These are direct instructions to Arjuna. Plus, including rather, a recommendation to act alongside Krishna's direction, to fight in accordance with Krishna's direction. So verse 37 on to about, I think, 43. What was this section? It started with a question by Arjuna. And his question was, when someone even knows that life is meant for a higher purpose, what is it that causes them to deviate away from that understanding and engage in sinful activities, to act even contrary to their interest? And Krishna described that the fundamental reason is a desire to enjoy. So you can say the obstacles, the main obstacle rather, to spiritual growth, the desire to enjoy in this world. And Krishna's recommendation was to live a regulated life. And in the purport, Prabhupada also comments that one has to actually be satisfied serving Krishna. Can I flip this board?
Prabhuji, in 1 to 15,
Yeah.
qualities to prescribed duties.
Purity of prescribed duties. Sorry, my handwriting is terrible.
And in that, the 3 sub-points. One is instruction
So,
with us.
yes.
Second is?
The second one is because the Vedas are spoken by the Lord, and because the prescribed duties are from the Vedas and the Vedas are spoken by the Lord, therefore the Lord is eternally in all prescribed duties. This follows that series of verses which says that annat bhavanti bhutani, that rice comes from rain comes from prescribed duties, or yagya comes from prescribed duties. Prescribed duties are mentioned by the Vedas are spoken by the Lord, and therefore the Lord is eternally present in all prescribed duties. But the emphasis of the section is to say that prescribed duties, you can find Krishna through them. It's not like it's material and so impure. That distinction, it is clarified that because it's instructions by Krishna, therefore they are pure. So now in chapter 4, we discussed 5 sections. The first one was verses 1 through to 3, where Krishna is glorifying the knowledge that he has spoken of. He's describing that it comes from parampara. Krishna is describing the lineage and heritage of this knowledge. Of knowledge just described. From verses 4 through to, I think, 15, what was the content of this section?
Krishna reveals his original nature.
Yes. So the special series of verses where Krishna speaks of his own transcendental nature. It was inspired of Arjuna's question. This section is actually not part of the flow of the Gita in these 6 chapters. 16 through to 24, I think. What was this section? Culminating in verse 24.
Further actions of karma yoga.
Sorry?
Further actions.
Was that later on, 25 through to 32?
25 to 32 is prescribed.
So that is what Prabhu said, right? So 16.
16 to 24, further action of karma yoga. That's what I will read.
Okay.
25 to 32 is various forms of karma yoga. Okay. Production of this knowledge.
Well, specifically this section is the kind of karma yoga remember that verse, action in inaction and inaction in action. So the type of karma yoga that equals jnana yoga. And culminating in verse 24, how all action can give you self-knowledge. So karma yoga here meaning prescribed duties. How all action translates to self-knowledge when one is seeking Krishna. And we particularly focused on the words Om Tat Sat of the 17th chapter. Or we also said Sarvam Shri Krishnarpanamastu, or Idam Krishnaya, Idam Na Mama, Idam Na Mama, the dedication of those activities prior to their performance to Krishna. Text 25 through to 32, the variety of prescribed duties. And the essence of this section was, it doesn't really matter what someone is doing, whether someone is, someone very low in society or someone apparently very high, whether someone is a great emperor or a huge policy maker or a simple person at home doing simple things. But regardless of what they do, it is how they do it that's actually important, and that determines the quality of the realization they achieve. And the final section, 33 through to, was it 43? 42? What was that? What is this section?
Glories of the transcendental.
Glories of transcendental knowledge. And particularly this point that the entire purpose of performing prescribed duties is that one gains knowledge of Atma. So the phrase was Jnanam Parisamapyate. Which verse number was this? You might need a copy of Bhagavad Gita. $33? Okay. Text 33. So if we were to abstract the contents of particularly chapters 2, 3, and 4, can I rub any of this that I've written? Is that okay? I might have mentioned this before. When I was studying in India, the teachers tend to have two boards. They write stuff here, and then they start writing here. And before you know it, they go back to the first side and wipe out what they've written. And the whole class is spent just kind of taking notes the whole time, because otherwise you miss what's being written. Now, if we were to abstract it, just have a look at what we've written here. And you can't see what's there before, but all that we've discussed so far, I want you to just take 2-3 minutes, draw a line in your notebook, like this, and with 3 stops on the line. Here, write Sambandha. Here, Abhidheya. And on the third side, write Prayojana. Sambandha means what?
No relation with the book or the novel.
So what are the 3 things that are what are the 3 things we describe relationships with? Lord, Jiva, material nature. So they're interrelationships, so that we know, when we know how things are related to each other, we know how they should be interacting. For example, if I know that I'm my wife's husband, then I know how to interact with her. But if I think of my wife as being a friend, my interaction would change. So Sambandha is knowledge of relationships, which helps me determine what my prayojana, what my goal should be. And Abhideya is the process to achieve that goal. So, if you can draw this line, take 2-3 minutes. Feel free to discuss it, in pairs or threes. But what is the Sambandha Gyan? What is the knowledge of relationships offered in what we've discussed so far? What is the goal that is being described? And what is the process being recommended to achieve that goal? Like process, what have we heard again and again and again throughout the last 3 chapters? Take 2-3 minutes. So to help Sambandha, for example, have a think about, how the jiva is described, or what is the essential characteristic of the living entity that is being described. What is the relationship between the living entity and material nature that is being described? So that way, how does it reflect who we are in those 4 chapters? How does it change the perception of what I'm talking about? And then is it a process of that we work with? Numbers for that. Not in general. The nerves are solid. Yes. And the connection to the nature. What is that nature? Is that when when conditions are not together. So we've got the fragrance. But is it a key things, or what is the nature of pure sense? So the nature. Can you address this with and the quality of this destructive So if I think that I'm going to be affected by the or that I need something, then I'm going to come to but if I'm convinced that I have enough energy, I don't need that energy. And goes about spiritual comes guided by the spirit self. Right. Or the original of the activity of the spirit self. So what goal is established in these 4 chapters? Actually, you mentioned that. Which one is fun? The Dhamma one. So, which means anything yourself. So what we do, everything we do to a higher purpose, which is to doing prescribed duties, in that all your knowledge or your actions are done to please Krishna. So you also get. But is that a process as well? That's the process. So if I understand that yes, I'm in journey right now, but my action is to be completely self-dependent and completely independent of it.
achieve which is what the should be. And so then what is the process when you start? The process is coming out and it is because I'm conditioned. Action means to have work at my mind. So the recommendation that was regain to regulate prescriptions. So that is it's like the last thing you say is that's how everybody starts explaining they do the process and then they see everything yes. What are you trying to achieve? Why are you doing this? Exactly. This is what the recommendation for when you look at any philosophy, you always bring it to these different bodies. How do people understand each other? Where do they want to go? How do they get from where they are to where they want to come?
With sort of preaching too, to be able to just to be able to get really solid in the knowledge and what your goals and how to get there. You need to be clear about all that.
How could you put this, like how would this be moved from preaching?
Well, just making sure that processes, they have different goals. Like he was explaining about the family, the children, your boss, the father was a boss, the father was a boss.
See, there's a connection together. Jesus is that's not knowledge that we get, it's that difference. And how they
And this is not separate from that, but part and parcel. Keep on explaining going all the different relationships.
yes, but I think the genes are but I think they're specific goals.
They're separated.
And then the deepest
Well, that's the perspective in this context.
You have to be where you are, which is where we are. Are you trying to achieve
We will get to our goals by doing it.
So being clear about the goals. There's a process as well.
Liberation of the soul is doing these things. It's called duty. All these actions, and then inaction, action, and zen action.
Helps us to gradually let go.
So you do that and achieve the
How does that go as a
everything else that you're making. Well, no, just start more aware of the beginning of the making. So before I used to just make it and then I forgot or now I think of it. Whereas in the beginning I was just thinking about myself. Whereas I found the more that I do it, I'm now more thinking about the offering way back in the making. And I'm also my spiritual master, so I'm offering to him. So it's just a process of more and more.
And you can understand that like those strategies, like food, work. I know you it's very hard.
It wasn't a conscious thing. It's like, we're the ones that clean up for the prescribe as opposed to afterwards. Shower before we go to the gym, afterwards. Yeah. So it's the consciousness. It's changing your attitudes towards what's doing. I'm sure there's loads of things that you were talking about you don't realise.
I do. I guess I can fit. You said, so I'm like waiting to table. How, I mean, I understand using money, it allows you the freedom to sit in a class and do it.
A good example, like that's the example. That's the what you like the dance. If you do an example, so when you do things and what you say, what so it's so easy to do something. So you said it, you should be doing one like make someone feel just why you quality like being around you and then somebody else has a
You might see the students of maybe some consciousness that they're spirit souls
spirit soul has an eternal connection with you.
Like, you may not be conscious of that, but I'm sure you, at some level, you
I do.
feel it.
Like I just, I do believe in that way, but still, just in regards to this model,
I think that's why it's a sort of gradual.
yeah, like I get it, and I can connect my job, but what about other people who do stuff?
Can settle that out, can be present in every universe that always has. It's not subject to the six transformations.
It's quite, you should see everything
It's
as well.
you know, watch
You
it.
get it and understand it, but I didn't get that to
What is it? Yeah, also about the connection with the soul.
I'm just, like my job is of course I can think about it.
Yes, is it dependent?
I'm not saying.
That's what I'm saying, is that you're already doing that. You're already doing it, so it's like, how can we be doing that? You're already.
Yeah, no, I get it. But I'm just saying, maybe it's not, I'm just saying like, the strategies as a, refinement, right?
Which is the natural, right? You are told what not to do.
Yeah, that's what I told you before. Yeah, not to the house.
Finding the father, right? You told you that it doesn't matter. You told me to find who you will check out. Original spiritual. So that's
Oh, I didn't get this week, so he was going to go into that.
the soul is the matter. The goal is to regain that original nature. And what is the process of it? And you see the repetition, right? Second, third, fourth chapter. You see it again and again and again. Krishna's heavily focusing on understanding. In discussion, maybe have a big discussion on why doesn't Krishna really There is not that is just and the focus of someone again in the first four chapters, the first six chapters is knowledge of the spirit soul. So what are the qualities of the spirit soul that is characters? You could see that on the on these
It's already stressful enough in my profile, which is doing funny things to your ears, it's changing the sound, so don't introduce new elements. It's just not used. It's all right.
I actually like to start this about how that's just the space of my parents.
You've got 3 weeks. Do last week. Yeah, so there's all kinds of teachings in the West to us to know to be able to realise these different things.
No, I think specifically, just to realize that we are the soul. Like knowledge is the body of the soul.
Yoga, yeah. So they're not doing bhakti, they're mindfully offering things to Krishna in order to get to
Not to liberate, like not to remove oneself something. That's
Krishna's only just kind of ways to get there.
That's very
I've been confused, so I was supposed to be doing this or I'm not. I suppose the lesson is that
Okay. So in terms of the timeline, or rather the stops we were looking at, what was the essential sambandha gyan, or knowledge of relationships, that was focused on? Was there a lot of description of the Lord in these first 6 chapters? The Lord's qualities, etc.? Some, a little bit, but not the focus, surely. Was it material nature? Was there any description of what material nature is or what its qualities are? Not really. So what is the focus of the Sambandha Gyan in the first 6 chapters? Spirit, soul. And what are the qualities of the soul that are described? It's eternal. Do you remember that question in the 2nd chapter test? Eternal, next. Sarvagata, can pervade every type of material body, can exist in every material situation. The spirit soul can exist without food, without water, with family, without family, in blazing heat in the sun, in freezing cold, and it will survive. Next. Yes, not subject to 6 transformations. You were about to say the same thing, Kate? Not subject to 6 transformations. Cannot be cut by any weapon, nor motioned by water, nor withered by the wind, etc. So based on these characteristics, what is the connection of the spirit soul to matter? Is there anything in matter that the spirit soul needs to survive, or exist, or be happy? Do I need a career? Do I need a family? Do I need anything of this world? The answer is no. So the basic Sambandha Gyan that's being offered is that the soul is completely independent of matter. That is the spirit soul's original nature. There are two things of the spirit soul that are not described, that actually the soul by nature has to be dependent on something, and two, the soul by nature is naturally dependent on Krishna. These two are deeper understanding of the spirit soul. Prabhupada mentions this in the introduction, and this also.
There's also thinking that the spirit soul is always active, has to be active.
Yes, Prabhupada does mention that. But I think he brings that up in the purport. You don't see that directly in the verses itself. The target of the verses is to say that, because this is Guru's instruction to the disciple has come with some material perplexity. And the Guru is saying, whatever problem you think you're in, actually it has got nothing to do with you. There's nothing of this world that can actually affect you. Based on that, what kind of goal can we establish for ourselves? Can I rub this off?
So you have the soul by nature has to be dependent on something.
Yes. That is the nature of the spirit soul.
Yeah.
You can't just exist
For no reason.
for no reason.
Like the purpose or the reason. Okay. And
The rest
then
onto
you
it,
say
yeah.
that it's naturally dependent on Krishna.
The spirits, yes.
That's the next step. That's where you.
Yes. The spirit soul's original nature is to depend on Krishna. Unable to depend on, or unwilling to depend on Krishna, Krishna gives the soul another option, depend on Maya. And that is the definition of a conditioned soul. But when we are told in the beginning, we've got nothing to do with material nature, we take our need to depend on something and we find that actual source that we can depend on. That's Krishna himself. But that is not the focus of the first 6 chapters. There are verses in the first 6 chapters that say if you don't depend on Krishna, like in that verse, if you don't have a higher taste, you'll be swept away. You remember that verse? If you don't, Vishyamini Vartante, look up, I think it's 2... Which is that verse number? Vishyamini Vartante, 259. If you look up verse 259, this verse indicates the dependent nature of the living entity. Has everybody found it? So when we say a higher taste, the living entity is naturally in need of experiencing some taste. They need to connect to something. They need to feel a part of something. They need to feel rasa in relationships. And if they have that in Krishna, they're completely satisfied and they can leave anything of this world. But devoid of that, it's impossible. And then that's described, in the next verses. You see in text 60, Krishna says, the senses are so strong and impetuous that they forcibly carry away the mind, even of a man of discrimination. And then Krishna says, one who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control and fixes his consciousness upon me is known as a man of steady intelligence. So Krishna is alluding to this fact that the living entity needs to be dependent. It's not directly mentioned in the verses. Prabhupada refers to it in the introduction. But that is actually the deepest nature of the living entity. What is being described here, to stop the living entity depending on matter, is to say that you are completely independent of matter. Many impersonalists think that means the spirit soul doesn't need anything else. And that's where they're mistaken. The Bhagavad Gita says that yes, you're independent of matter so that you stop worrying about material problems and look for a transcendental solution. But then the way to actually achieve that transcendental nature is to learn to depend on Krishna. Okay, so this is the Sambandha Gyan that's established. So if one is told that the spirit soul has got nothing to do with matter, what is the goal that the spirit soul can establish? What is the goal that is established? To realize that, basically. Like if I'm told, the company that I'm working for, I've got nothing to do with that company. I'm not even an employee there. I'm going there and, filing things or something, and I'm told that actually I'm not even an employee there. I've got nothing to do with that company. The company has nothing to do with me. What is my next course of action? To find a separate identity from that company. So that's the definition of liberation. So I'll just wipe this.
So we are not touching the Avidya part?
We will, but in order to discuss a process, you have to discuss the goal, right?
So is it process goal and then Avidya?
Yeah, and that's how we think. Like for example, if I think, I'm so-and-so's mother. So then I have to think, okay, so what do I want for my child? Then I have to think, what can I do to give that to my child? So yes, we draw it up on this timeline because it's like knowledge of relationships and then the goal, but then it's the process to get from one place to another. Therefore, we put it in between. So, independent of matter. And the goal is to realize one's nature independent of matter. Why am I not saying realize one's nature as being a servant of Krishna? Why am I not saying that? Sorry? So the question was, why am I not saying that the goal is to realize that I'm a servant of Krishna? Why am I not saying that?
Because that's not covered in this chapter.
It's not so prominent. That's the focus of the next 6 chapters. But here what is focused on is the nature of the spirit soul. So therefore these practitioners, yes, they understand that they have to worship Krishna, but they worship Krishna not as we do to develop a relationship with him. They establish a relationship with Krishna, they worship Krishna to realize their own nature independent of matter. It's a little different to the goal established by the devotees. And what is the process? Okay. And do you see that prominently coming through these 3 chapters, 2, 3, and 4? The focus on prescribed duties? How Krishna again and again and again brings every one of his instructions to tell Arjuna, fight, fight, fight. So it is prescribed duties. Now, why is Krishna recommending prescribed duties?
Because he is in every prescribed duties.
Sorry?
Because he is in every... Sorry, I'm just telling the... Because Vedas tells us to follow the prescribed duties. Vedas are the words spoken by the Lord, and therefore he is in every prescribed duties.
But that's not the only way to worship him.
But you're asking about why prescribed duties.
Why is Krishna recommending prescribed duties as a way to achieve that goal? You look at, for example, there are many sages who don't necessarily perform prescribed duties. What are examples of this? In the 7th canto Bhagavatam, has anybody read of the description of the Python man? Who was Dattatreya? He was just lying on the road, and whatever came by his way, he would eat it. If nothing came, he wouldn't eat it. His realization was, whatever Krishna wants to send me, he will send me. I will just worship him. He was doing nothing. So there are people who actually do nothing. But why is that not recommended? Why can't we all just lie on the road waiting for food to come our way?
All is considered to be active.
Yes.
And
But-
prescribed duties are one's natural ways of living.
Natural to the spirit soul. Spirit soul has got nothing to do with prescribed duties, right?
Krishna says you can't live even a moment without doing anything.
Yes. Yes.
It's because an Arjuna at this stage is still attached, he's still lamenting, he's still on the material.
He is still attached.
To get further, he needs to work through prescribed duties.
Yes.
Whereas the Sthipapadana there don't have any attachments, so
They can genuinely be independent.
they don't need to do prescribed duties because they don't have any attachments.
Yes, that's exactly the answer.
Does, and we do because we're still attached.
And if we didn't do our prescribed duties, what would happen? What did Krishna say in the beginning of the 3rd chapter? Social disorder, and we would maintain those desires in our mind. So Krishna calls that mithyachara, a false pretender. Someone who has desires, but doesn't legitimately try to find a place for them in society and connect them to him. Rather, they just, restrain themselves from those desires and just keep them in their mind. So one is attached. In other words, one identifies materially. So prescribed duties means to take one's material identification, and there are some duties recommended for such identification. If I identify as being a husband, a father, etc., or a kshatriya or a brahmana, particular kind of nature, I'm given a role to play in society, a service in the social structure. And if I connect that role to Krishna, I can become more attached to Krishna and leave aside my material identification and come closer to my original nature. So this actually is the summary of what we've discussed so far. Now, in the 5th and 6th chapters, the focus will turn to this. And there will be a refined discussion on, again, on performance of prescribed duties, but also the transition from prescribed duties to leaving prescribed duties. So therefore, the title of the 5th chapter of the Gita is called Karma Sannyasa Yoga. Or, sannyasa means to give up. Or the yoga of connecting to Krishna by the giving up, one, of material propensity for action, and 2, the activity itself. By the way, was this exercise useful?
Yes.
Okay, good. And what is the thing that connects, because we've discussed 4 chapters, that's a lot of content. What is it that enables us to abstract this from those 4 chapters? There's a specific question, actually. The question is why? Why does it matter? Why is it important? And even if we don't understand the connection of a verse, if you approach every verse with this question, what is this verse saying? Why is it important? Where does it fit in? Those questions, when you're reading a verse, to try and put it in as part of a framework, to try and understand where in the framework this whole thing fits, allows us to piece the entire thing together into one concept. Because everything we've discussed so far, there's been a lot of detail, right? And often we focus on the detail. But the question is, why is it important? What is it trying to do? What is the direction in which we are being taken through these instructions? And if we understand the overall concept, then it'll be like, okay, I see this instruction, I've seen this instruction before, and I know where it fits in. And as a general principle, even for our own devotional life, if every instruction we're given, we're asked why. Not like, why should I do it? But, why is it important? And that contemplation is important. Why is this important? How does it fit into this whole process of bhakti? And we will see this so much when we read, particularly Nectar of Devotion, and also the middle 6 chapters of the Gita. We come to understand why we do what we do, and what is the focus of all our activity. And if we understand that, then we'll know how to properly direct that activity. Okay, so chapter 5. Sorry?
It's not explicitly given that soul is dependent on Krishna. So in the following chapter, is it?
Well, there are indications where Krishna says you have to depend on me, like Matpara. There are instructions like that throughout the 2nd, 3rd chapters. In the 5th chapter, you'll see descriptions of the practitioner being asked to meditate on the Lord's qualities. Even in the 4th chapter, there was that instruction which said that one who understands that I'm not at all implicated in this world, that person achieves liberation. So that the hint is there. And there's also with verses like Vishya Vinivartante, that by only a higher taste one can leave. It's clear that there's something that the soul has to do higher to leave this material world. But it is not explicitly enunciated. But Prabhupada actually brings out this point in the introduction. Do you remember where he says that? He says the dharma of the living entity is to serve, as much as salt has a dharma of being salty. And so the living entity can choose whether he wants to serve Krishna or Maya. That's where, and that point is the deepest understanding of the living entity. I cannot emphasize it enough. The living entity by nature is dependent. And if we understand this one concept, we will understand why people have psychological problems in this world, what people are trying to achieve. Like, for example, if someone is satisfied in their relationship with Krishna, emotionally, intellectually, they're completely satisfied. They don't need anything here. But if they don't get their needs fulfilled in a relationship with Krishna, they have to seek it in some place in this world, right? And they have to get it in their parents, they have to get it in their family. What happens if those needs are not fulfilled, even by their parents? They end up as, with some psychological deficiency. And the entire branch of psychology is there to treat these deficiencies without understanding what the actual root cause is. But the foundation of the entire branch of psychology is to understand that the living entity is dependent. Everyone needs to connect, needs to feel a part of something, needs to grow. And this one point actually will solve so many problems. There was this pastime by Sripad Ramanuja, and Ramanuja was writing Sri Bhashya, or he was dictating Sri Bhashya, and Kuresha was writing it. And at one point, Ramanuja said, the characteristic of the living entity is to be completely full of knowledge and happiness, eternal full of knowledge and happiness. And Kuresha stopped writing. He was just writing, he stopped writing. Because Ramanuja had told him that if you ever find something of what I say to be questionable or subject to misinterpretation, stop writing and I will reconsider my statements. This was the only point in the Sri Bhashya that Kuresha actually stopped writing. And then Ramanuja was initially irritated. He was like, wait, why is he, that's correct, the Shastra says this. But then he reflected a little bit more, and then he thought, if I say that the living entity is eternal, full of knowledge and happiness, the implication is that the living entity is said to be independent. And that's a mistake, because the living entity only has these qualities by virtue of being dependent on Krishna. And so then he revised that statement to say that the living entity is eternally full of knowledge and completely dependent on Krishna. That's now what the Sri Bhashya says. But this is actually the deepest understanding of the living entity. When we say Jivera Swarupohoi Krishna Nitya Das, that the eternal constitution of the living entity is to be a servant of Krishna, what we're actually saying, and in the Nectar of Devotion there's that example that Prabhupada gives, that the inherent nature of a child is to walk, and that's always there. What we're saying is that the inherent nature of the living entity, or when Prabhupada says the inherent nature of the living entity is to serve, or another way of saying it is, the living entity always has to have a sense of I and mine. I am someone's son, or I am Krishna's servant, and Krishna is mine. He's my father, he's my husband, he's my friend. Or you have to have the connection in this world. We're all referring to the same concept. inherent nature to walk, inherent nature to identify as I and mine, inherent nature to be dependent. All of these things refer to this underlying nature, that we have to be connected to something, feel a part of something. Until then, there's a hole in our heart. And our actual constitution is built to have that connection with Krishna. But if we don't do that, we have a Krishna-shaped hole, which we try and fill with everything else. And it's only, at best, partially satisfying. It's not complete. And that's why we wander everywhere in this world. So this actual picture of the living entity has been filled out by the Vaishnavacharyas. And it's indicated by what the verses say. But it's actually really deeply confidential. And it's not described that directly yet. Okay. So,
You say that the original state is to serve Krishna, but also Krishna to serve you, like that you receive that too, like, and they're not too different either?
No. Krishna can actually be independent.
Okay.
As Paramatma, for example. But
the receiving of being served as well, like, you're getting served, you serve someone.
That's not the nature of the living entity, but the nature of the living entity is to experience rasa, which means the giving and taking in a relationship, or the moods that come about within the context of a relationship. So the way I understand it is this. Sometimes we say that Krishna, he's the original enjoyer. And for the purpose of his enjoyment, he has expanded all these living entities in this world. I don't know how others may react to this statement. When I first heard it, my impression was, so Krishna's like me. If I want to enjoy, I create things for my enjoyment. And it means that I'm using everything else. So does that mean Krishna is using us? Isn't that one implication that one can draw out? That Krishna is the original enjoyer. From him, he has created so many living entities, or expanded himself with so many living entities for the purpose of expanding his enjoyment. But then if you think more deeply about this statement, Prabhupada gives example of a father. The father wants to expand his enjoyment by creating a family. When a family is created, is the father more in the position of service or taking service? You see that there's so much, giving on part of the father. So Krishna's mood of enjoyment, actually, is not like ours. It's not exploitative. It is to actually enjoy relationships with living entities. But the point remains that he is the master. It is around him that everything revolves, not us. And he's the object of service, and it's our service to serve. Okay.
Can you just, sorry, you said Krishna's mode of enjoyment is what?
Is to enjoy relationships.
But what was it about service side? So he's not serving us.
In a relationship, there's always interaction. Like, for example, Krishna takes more pleasure in fulfilling the desires of his devotees than in their serving him. So, for example, we say that Krishna takes more pleasure in being in Arjuna's charioteer than he does in necessarily the puja and offerings made by countless other devotees. He takes more pleasure in keeping the shoes of Nanda Maharaj on his head than in all the worship of the devotees. But Nanda Maharaj himself identifies as being a servant of Krishna. There are verses in the Bhagavatam where when Uddhava goes to Vrindavan, and Nanda Maharaj describes remembering Krishna's lotus feet in the core of his heart and mind. The fundamental characteristic and nature of every living entity is to connect to Krishna in a mood of service. And
The word used, lila, for
it is lila, but
what Krishna enjoys.
okay. But what is happening in that lila? Krishna's every Is it that Vrindavan or Vaikuntha, it's constructed around any particular devotee? Or is it that all the devotees orchestrate together to serve Krishna's pleasure or Vishnu's pleasure? In Vaikuntha and Vrindavan, Mathura, Ayodhya, wherever it may be, Yogamaya, it orchestrates the countless living entities together to serve Krishna. But Krishna is not an exploitative master. He doesn't need our service. But he loves to relish that relationship with us. And in that relationship, there's giving and taking. And that's just Krishna's nature. As much as a father may hold a child on his back and walk, sometimes Krishna washes the feet of his devotees, as he does for Narada Muni or other sages. But that's his own pleasure. Does that answer that question? I see some contemplative stares in the distance.
So interacting with each other, devotees and family, we should...
For Krishna's pleasure.
For Krishna's pleasure, but we should also with each other have that mood that Krishna wants with us, is to relish and cultivate relationships. Put that as very important.
With ourselves or between? Yeah.
With each other as well. That's the example, exactly.
Partially. I mean, the thing is that if, for example, you have a father, everyone has a father, but if you have siblings, don't you naturally feel connected to them? So the thing is that it's not necessary to establish a relationship with other people separate from one's relationship with Krishna. When one's relationship with Krishna, as it becomes stronger, you find that your relationships with other people also become stronger. And that's very natural. Because right now, my relationship with family, for example, might just be based on the fact that I've been born there. Or that they're doing so much for me, or they might think I'm doing so much for them. But at some stage, if my physical or emotional needs change, many people just decide, okay, I don't feel that connection anymore. But when we all feel connected to Krishna, I see everybody as being a part and parcel of Krishna. There's no question of not being connected to anybody else. So rather than feeling like, I don't feel connected to this person, I'm not attached to this person, the devotee begins to think that actually I feel connected to everybody. Some people more because their mood of serving Krishna is very similar to mine. So there's a natural affinity. But they feel actually connected to everybody. They see a person and they actually either feel deep friendship or deep compassion. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says the characteristic of love for Krishna are these two qualities. Friendship with the devotees, compassion for those who are running away. So that automatically indicates some level of connection.
That's love, isn't it, really?
That love for Krishna translates into love for everyone else. And that love manifests either as friendship or as compassion. Okay, so chapter 5, Karma Sannyasa Yoga. Now, Srila Prabhupada translates this chapter as action in Krishna consciousness. In that sense, there's no difference between chapter 5 and chapter 3, because at the end of the day, every action should be connected and offered to Krishna. However, going from a technical perspective, the third chapter is called Karma Yoga, the act of serving Krishna through prescribed duties of body, mind, and words, or connected to the body, basically. Karma Sannyasa Yoga in chapter 5, it runs around a fundamental question that Arjuna asks in the first verse. And it seems similar to the first verse asked in the third chapter. So if we can just open chapter 5, text 1. Let's read the Sanskrit in translation. Arjuna hovacha sannyasam karmanam Krishna punar yogam cha samshasi yachreya etayorekam tanme bruhi sunishchitam. Translation.
Arjuna said, O Krishna, first of all, you ask me to renounce work, and then again you recommend work with devotion. Now will you kindly tell me definitely which of the two is more beneficial?
Now I want all of you to do an exercise. Go to chapter 3, text 1, read the translation, and read the translation for chapter 5, text 1. Does it seem different or similar to you? Similar or different? Similar and different?
In a different manner, yes.
So what are the differences that you see?
Well, chapter 3, the question is asked on a material level. In chapter 5, the question is asked in a material level, but one step ahead in a renounced manner.
First of all, you ask me to renounce work, and then you recommend work with devotion. And why do you want to engage me in this ghastly warfare if you think intelligence is better than fruit of work? Both of them are talking about karma and jnana. It's hard for me to see a difference directly in the text. This is what the acharyas say. They say that what Arjuna is asking here is this. In the 3rd chapter, he's saying, you have recommended both the path of karma and jnana, right? So why can't I just start with jnana? That is Arjuna's question. In the beginning of the 5th chapter, his question is, if one has achieved the stage of jnana, should one continue with karma? Because there have been instructions like that as well. For one who is in that state of atma ratir, they should continue to work to set an example, for example. And there were also instructions to say that one who has reached that stage does not need to work. There were also instructions that said that ultimately all work ends in one's prescribed duties. That was in the 4th chapter, right? Text 33, I think, was what we discussed earlier. Jnanam parisamapyate. So if all karma has to end in jnana, when someone has achieved the stage of knowledge, has achieved an understanding of their original nature as being a spirit soul, has transcended the need to work. So should they work or should they not work? That is the essence of Arjuna's question. So therefore this chapter is called Karma Sannyasa Yoga. Sannyasa means to renounce or to give up. So the method of connecting to Krishna after giving up one's prescribed duties. So that is the topic of this chapter. Now, this requires a little bit of background. Prabhupada, of course, will, and Krishna will actually say, no, my recommendation is that even those who have understood that they're a spirit soul, they should continue with their prescribed duties. That will be his recommendation. And that's the topic of the first 6 verses of the 5th chapter. But before that, I want to provide a context behind what's happening. So this is the timeline of advancement. Here a person is materially distressed, as Arjuna was. He goes and asks real inquiry of a spiritual master. And that's because of his underlying piety. Do you remember discussing this flowchart once? Materially distressed, real inquiry of a spiritual master. Well, first he has to find a spiritual master. And that's because Krishna arranges that spiritual master for him. His piety gets him to ask real, actually no, this comes a little later. He has real inquiries, then Krishna sends a spiritual master for him to ask his questions. The spiritual master gives him knowledge of the spirit soul in comparison to the body. he recommends the process of Nishkama Karma Yoga, working through his attachments and prescribed duty to purify his heart. Now, in the scale of advancement, here is someone whose sense of I and mine is directed materially. And here is someone where he's liberated. As he transitions from this end of the spectrum over through to here, practitioners change a certain part of their practice. Up to a certain stage, say here, their focus is much more on their prescribed duties, which is intended to purify their material consciousness. But in this section, their focus is much more on reviving their original spiritual identity. So in this initial section, they're running away from a negative conception. In this section here, they're focusing on a positive cultivation of their spiritual identity. It is in this section that you have two processes: Jnana Yoga and Ashtanga Yoga. These are the only two processes that are recommended or available in Vedic literature. We're not talking about Bhakti Yoga, that's a different thing. But these are the only two processes recommended in this phase, where one is positively cultivating one's spiritual identity. So Arjuna's question is, when I have purified my sense of I and mine, and I have removed that material identity to a very large extent, what should I do to cultivate my spiritual identity? Should I focus on prescribed duties still? Or should I now focus on connecting to you through another process? That is Arjuna's question. Any questions on this?
Chapter, like the difference, or maybe I can see the similarity. The difference to me is in the third chapter, Krishna is basically, Arjuna is saying, you wanted me to do this, so the first part.
So Arjuna is here, he's asking, well, Krishna, you recommended that Jnana Yoga and Nishkama Karma Yoga are both processes. Why can't I just choose Jnana Yoga? And Krishna is saying right now you can't do it at all. But here, you actually can perform Jnana Yoga. You're qualified to do so. So Krishna, do you recommend Jnana Yoga or Nishkama Karma Yoga? When I'm here, tell me what I should do. Was that your question?
Is this the difference? Like that is chapter 3 and this is chapter 5?
This is chapter 3, this is chapter 5. That's the difference. Any other questions? This is really important to understand because this is the content of the 5th and 6th chapters. It is that last stretch. For us, yeah?
Can you just go over that timeline thing again?
This thing?
Yeah, just the original view when you first started.
Here, I identify completely with my body. Family is mine, house is mine, money is mine. This is the stage of liberation, where I understand that I'm a spirit soul completely disconnected to matter. I don't need anything material to satisfy myself. Now, in order to realize my Atma, what Krishna had said was that I need to perform prescribed duties, Buddhi Yoga, with my intelligence directed towards purification of heart. That purification of heart means that my sense of I and mine is removed from matter and established in Krishna. At least to a weak degree, I need to understand that I am Krishna's servant and Krishna is my master. In devotional service, this is much, much higher and more intense. But by virtue of offering prescribed duties to Krishna, this sense of I and mine becomes more directed to Krishna. And therefore, one is given the strength to leave one's material identity and move along this line closer to one's nature. I'm a pure spirit soul. But along the process, there comes a point where my material identity is so weakened that I don't need those prescribed duties anymore. I can actually sit down in one place and completely meditate on the Lord. Perhaps even in isolation. I don't need society. I don't need family. I don't need a career to feel fulfilled. I have understood enough that I'm disconnected from matter, that I can focus now on a very strong cultivation of identifying with the Supreme Lord, with the Supreme Spirit, rather than trying to run away from matter.
So there's a tipping point, you say?
There is a point where that happens. You know, there is a parallel, which is not the same. It is not at all the same. There's a parallel in devotional service. It becomes like, yes, I'm running away from thinking I am of this body, but then there's a part, and it comes at the stage of bhava and prema, where the devotee begins to run towards Krishna. This is the stage where you see, especially in the Babaji, in the mood of a Babaji, they will sit in one place and continuously chant Hare Krishna. So this is their very strong positive cultivation of their spiritual identity. One is they're running away from matter, as most of us are, and there's the other part where we are strongly running towards Krishna. And the material nature doesn't disturb us anymore at that point. It's not like I'm suddenly going to be agitated by sex desires or things like that. Rather, I want to serve Krishna as, a tree in Vrindavan, or I want to serve Sri Ramachandra as being his servant. There is some very, very strong focus, and there's a sadhana to achieve that. So one begins to go in that line.
Prabhuji, in that timeline where you said that I and me, material.
I and mine, yeah.
And then at the end, liberation. The I and me material reside, chapter 3, where Arjuna is kind of confused.
Yeah.
And in chapter 4, you're saying that the point where...
Chapter 4 is more a discussion of how one can be purified by performance of prescribed duties. You can say it's the other side of chapter 3. Chapter 3 tells you focus on prescribed duties, it'll purify you. Chapter 4 tells you how it'll purify you.
So can you give an example of Arjuna's life, where he was in that stage?
It's really hard to see Arjuna's life from that perspective, because the entirety of Bhagavad Gita is kind of Arjuna playing a role. But you see this, what's the best example that I can think of? When the Pandavas, after Krishna left this world, there's a description, I think, in the 15th chapter of the first canto, where Yudhishthira Maharaj performed a sacrifice and installed Parikshit Maharaj as the king. He then, from that yajna, took the fire of renunciation and put it in his heart. And then completely destroying his... it's poetic language. What it means is he cut himself off from the kingdom. And cutting himself off, he completely absorbed himself internally in his original identity as being a servant of Krishna. And he just walked out of the palace. His brothers were running behind him. Maharaj, wait. He said not one word. He just walked out. And they were running behind him. Maharaj, wait, please let us come with you. He just kept walking. If they come, they come. They don't come, they don't come. They just walked. But you see, and in India actually, you see this sometimes. When you have, in villages you would see this. You would get elderly people, and raise your hand if you've seen this. You get elderly people, at some point they start speaking about going to Varanasi or Kashi or Vrindavan. And then suddenly nobody will see them. Without telling family or anything, they just disappear. Has anybody seen this?
People are so attached.
Nobody has seen this? Even from villages? Okay, I haven't seen it, I've heard of it. Like 2-3 devotees have told me that their parents did this. Their parents would this is actually Vedic culture. Their elders would just disappear. And then nobody would know what had happened to the elders specifically, but they would understand that this person has gone to die, has gone to live the last stage of their life exclusively in a spiritual atmosphere. So these people would go to Varanasi, they would go to Kashi, they would go to Vrindavan, Mathura, like that, and exclusively cultivate bhakti. and prepare to die.
So that minute change of attachment.
It is not a minute, it's a gradual process throughout. But at one point it becomes...
It's an action. It's like second of action. It is definitely you're piling and you're understanding the liberation process. But the action is just for a matter of minutes or a second.
You mean the transition?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
What you're talking about is the middle of I, my, and liberation.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, exactly. It's that point you suddenly realize, okay, I need something else. Maybe it's like, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this, but then at some point, actually, I need to do this. You walk out. Yeah.
In not in my village, but I know one person. He went to Kashi, but he came back.
And Krishna will describe this. He will say in the 5th chapter, the path of jnana is dangerous because if someone's mind becomes attached again, it's a problem. They will fall down. If I leave my family and take sannyas, and then my desires again start to develop, I feel, oh, my children, then it's a huge problem. So Krishna says, rather than taking, the order of renunciation at that time, just stay within your grihastha life and keep cultivating Krishna consciousness until you reach a higher stage. Then I will tell you what to do. But right now I want to focus on this transition point. Yeah.
But this point can happen in the very early age.
No. Oh, this is not age. I'm talking about the scale of realization. So yes, this is completely independent of age. Yes. Any questions on this?
Can we relate this to Buddha? When he left.
You can relate it to every saint. Yes. Of course, Lord Buddha was a different case. He was, you can say, a partial incarnation of the Lord. So it's a different thing. For him, from the very beginning of life, he went there. But for other saints, you look at their past lives, you will always see that there's always a preparation. This Nishkama Karma Yoga process can take lifetimes. When I say lifetimes, it means like literally hundreds and hundreds of lifetimes. Bhakti Yoga is a lot faster. But after lifetimes of practice, they may reach this transition, they move on. So even if it appears in this life someone has just transitioned, their history has been very long. Okay, so now I want to focus on, in this process, can I rub this off? Or should I flip it and rub out the other side? Huh? Okay, you don't need this? Now, when one reaches that tipping point, so here is that tipping point again. I and mine, materially focused. Here, liberated. I and mine as Krishna's servant, and Krishna is my master. So say here's your tipping point. Typically here, an option opens up for them, and that is called Jnana Yoga. The method of worshipping the Lord through one's intelligence. You can say through intelligence, through knowledge, intelligence / knowledge. Now, this is not Krishna's recommendation for exactly the reason that if this requires certain level of detachment, and if one again somehow becomes materially attached, one can't run back to one's family and say, please accept me, I'm sorry I left you. That's very awkward and difficult. But Krishna is recommending actually, so here you're practicing Nishkama Karma Yoga. He says in the 5th chapter, keep practicing for some more time. And when your level of detachment is higher, then you go to Ashtanga Yoga. And this is safer because it involves direct meditation on my form. And you can use this to run the home stretch. Everyone at some stage actually needs to practice Ashtanga Yoga. But if you go through the Jnana Yoga stage, the process can be a little bit different, and I will describe that now. So the process looks like this. The foundation is always Nishkama Karma Yoga, knowledge of spirit soul. Nishkama Karma Yoga, you can go to Jnana, and then you go upwards, or you go to Ashtanga Yoga, you go upwards. The Jnana Yoga process is actually longer. It is longer. And the process of liberation is also longer. The process is longer, the process is harder. Whereas in Ashtanga Yoga, the liberation by comparison is quick and it's much easier, the process. But you focus on staying here longer in Nishkama Karma Yoga, and you develop more detachment. Of course, you can always get people practicing Jnana who can go to Ashtanga Yoga. That is always an option. But these are the two general routes that are chosen. You will see a lot more detail on these two paths in the second and third chapters of the second canto of Bhagavatam. And the information I'm giving you now is from those two chapters. Okay. Can I rub this off?
No, what is the soul, is it?
Soul, yes. So knowledge of spirit soul. Oh, the goal is to merge into Brahman. Liberation. Full liberation.
Not going back to the Godhead.
Not in this process. Because this is, in the first 6 chapters, remember, the Sambandha is one's knowledge of spirit soul. So then it's to establish one's eternal identity. Of course, if they come in contact with devotees and they develop this mood of developing a relationship with Krishna, then they can also cultivate their spiritual identity. But as far as the knowledge has been given in the first 6 chapters, this is the area that they're going towards. So if you want an understanding of what Jnana Yoga is, the clearest description in Bhagavad Gita is chapter 9, text 15. So if you would like to open that verse. In the 5th chapter or the 4th chapter, you will not see a direct description of the sadhana of a Jnana Yogi. But you will see it in chapter 9, text 15. So the verse reads, Jnana yagyena chapi anye. There are other people who, understanding my transcendental form, they worship me using Jnana Yoga. Yajanto mam upasate. And these are the processes given in the 3rd and 4th line. Ekatvena, pritakvena, bahuda, vishvato mukam. What does eka mean? Single one. So another name for this style of worship is called aham graha pasana. Or I'll split it actually. Aham, it's actually one word. The full word is spelled like this. Aham graho pasana. But it's merged in. So the 3 words that form it is aham graha upasana. Who has heard of this phrase before? Aham grahopasana? Okay. Aham means I, myself, accept upasana, the style of worship where I accept myself to be identical to the Supreme Lord. So this is where you actually sit down and meditate on yourself as being one with Krishna.
Same as Krishna.
Same as Krishna. Now, this is what it means. These practitioners, so Krishna is saying, knowing my transcendental nature, knowing me to be the Supreme Lord, people identify with me and worship me in that way. So this is a legitimate form of worship. These practitioners are not saying that they are Krishna. They are identifying themselves with Krishna. What's an example of this? Suppose I want to become, a sports star. Can we shut the door, please? Suppose I want to become a sports star. And I start to meditate, for example, some of my heroes growing up were boxers. So if you look at, for example, I used to follow Tyson, I used to follow Ali, Frazier, Foreman, like that. I used to follow these boxers. But if I were to meditate, for example, on Muhammad Ali, I were to meditate on his speed, his particular charisma, his attitude, his trash talk, I identify with him, what is likely to happen? I begin to?
You cultivate his nature.
I cultivate his nature. I become influenced. So if I'm identifying with Krishna as being the supreme Brahman, what nature of mine do I unearth? My nature is being a spirit soul, an eternal spirit soul disconnected from matter. So in that timeline here, or in that of realization, material identity and liberation, when I'm in this home stretch, I'm cultivating my eternal nature. By identifying with the Supreme Brahman, I inherently uncover my own quality as being eternal like him. There are various mantras in the Vedas that describe this. Has anybody heard of this? Tat Tvam Asi? That's what it means. That I am. I am that. The purpose is not to say that I am Krishna, which is the general view of many impersonalistic schools. It is to rather say that I am of the same spiritual nature as Krishna. Or, Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahma. You will see that many impersonalistic schools meditate on these phrases, use these phrases for their meditation, but they don't actually know what they're doing or why they're doing it. They think because they are Krishna, by meditating on this, they'll understand that they are God. They're actually incorrect. By meditating on this, one is supposed to understand that I'm of the same spiritual nature as Krishna. Pritakvena. In the Bhakti Sandarbha, by the way, this Aham Grahopasana is also used by people who want mystic powers. You will see, particularly in Kerala and South India, that many people identify with Kartikeya. Does everybody know who Kartikeya is? Lord Shiva's son, first son. And by identifying with him, they acquire certain mystic powers. The ability to, for example, take an object from far away and manifest it in one's hand. The ability to, for example, some people who who perform Aham Grahopasana, and there was a devotee, a proper disciple who did this before he came to ISKCON. When they were performing Abhishek for the deity of Kartikeya, he actually felt milk going down his body. And afterwards you could see strains of milk on his body. Has anybody heard of stigmata? Do you know what stigmata is? It is, for those who don't know, the highest form of Christian mysticism is to meditate on Jesus Christ as he stands on the cross, because that is seen as a symbol of being the greatest sacrifice of compassion in the world. And that's the highest level of spirituality that they espouse. So you get saints like Saint Francis or Saint Teresa, etc., and they would meditate on Jesus Christ in that form. Meditating on him in that form, they themselves would develop the exact same wounds that Jesus himself developed, with pus, etc. They would develop a sore here on their leg, and Jesus was speared by the Roman soldiers to see if he had actually passed away or not on the right side of his body. They developed that wound also. This is considered to be one of the highest attainment of Christian mysticism. It's a form of aham grahopasana. Now, Prithakvena means it is the worship of demigods, because the word prithak means different. So Prithakvena means it's the worship of demigods, understanding that they are a part of Krishna's universal body. For example, these yogis, they meditate on the sun as being the eye of Vishnu, on Indra as being the arms of Vishnu. So you can say both these forms of worship, they're an abstract form of worship, right? It's not direct worship. It's an abstract form of worship, and that's what Jnana Yoga is. Bahuda Vishvatomukam, this means to collect all of the opulences of the Lord together in the universe. The sun, the moon, the mountains, the rivers, the grass, and meditate on all of them together as being the form of the Lord. So this is like Vishvarupa meditation. Or meditation on the universal form of the Lord. According to the impersonalistic tradition, this is the best form of worship, this is the second best, this is the third best. This is not the opinion of the Vaishnavas, this is the opinion of the impersonalists. But the characteristic of all three forms of worship that you see is that it is abstract. It uses one's intelligence, it uses one's knowledge. It is a form of meditation on something connected to the Lord through one's intelligence, or it is a form of identifying oneself with the Lord. And the inherent purpose of all of these things is to identify with Krishna's inherent spiritual nature. So therefore it forms into this part of not running away from material identification, but running towards identifying spiritually. Any questions on this? We won't be elaborating on the Jnana Yoga again, because it's important to understand this, because you see this in many, many, many traditions. You will see this in a number of traditions. But this is not recommended for Vaishnavas, because for Vaishnavas, they worship the form of the Lord directly, and their results are much higher. And Krishna says that in the 9th chapter.
So the last one, the Vishvarupa meditation, when they are meditating on the form, they're meditating on the form in order to get somewhere else.
It's a way of meditating on the form of the Lord, but it's an indirect meditation.
Why is that?
It's not Gopinath's form. They're not meditating on his flute, his lotus face, his lotus feet. So it's an abstract form of meditation, but it's a meditation on, if you'd like, it's a meditation on the form of the Lord to start to cultivate one's spiritual identity. The details of exactly how it helps them, this part I'm not sure.
So the universal form, what specifically is that?
Like, for example, in the second canto of Bhagavatam, there's a description of every feature of the universe, like the sun, the moon, the hills, the rivers. The rivers are compared to the veins of the veins of the Lord, the grass to the body hair of the Lord, the mountains, so the trees to the hair of the Lord. I think the mountains are his bones. I don't remember the details, but there's an entire meditation that is cultivated in this process.
It's in the Bhagavatam.
It's in the Bhagavatam, yeah. But the purpose is to run towards one's spiritual identity as being, eternal spirit soul. Last questions on this? Now I'm going to describe what their process of elevation is. It is a very gradual process because it's hard for them to give up their material identification completely. What I'm going to describe is described in the second canto Bhagavatam, third chapter. End of second chapter, third chapter, like that.
Canto 2?
Canto 2, yeah. So, when Jnana Yogis accomplish their process in this world, so say this is, earth. From earth, they go into the heavenly planets. They enjoy until they're able to give up their desire for enjoyment. And there are, of course, gradations of heavenly planets. They keep going up and up and up until they're able to give up certain, like the grosser forms of material enjoyment, until they finally go to Brahmaloka. There are some details about how and when they transit out of Brahmaloka, but at some point, when they are ready, they've given up their material desire, or sometimes at the end of Brahma's life, if they're ready, along with Brahma, they transit outside the material shell. Now, outside the material shell, there are 7 layers which encase the universe itself. You have earth, water, fire, air, ether, ahankara, and then finally Mahatattva. These are material elements. They reach the earth layer, they see a particular form of the Lord. The details I don't remember. That's mentioned Brihad Bhagavatamrita. But in the earth layer, they completely experience the sensation of fragrance. And then they give it up. They transit to water, where they completely experience the sensation of taste. They give it up. Fire, form. Experience it completely, give it up. Then they go to air. They completely experience touch. They give it up. They go to ether. They completely experience sound. They give it up. They go to ahankara and then mahatattva, and which is where they completely give up their sense of I am anything connected to this material world. Giving that up, they see the form of Mahavishnu. I'm sorry, I'm not able to draw the Lord. He's not a line. But they see the form of Mahavishnu, offer obeisances to him, and then merge into the Brahman effulgence. Or they merge into him. It's one of the two. But this is the stage of liberation. In the Bhagavatam, this is called Krama Mukti. Or the gradual path of liberation. So Arjuna is asking the question of Krishna, when I have given up my desire I've had a certain amount of purification of heart, what should I do? Should I continue working or not? Should I go through this path? Is what